will be up to the board of the airport authority to make the case for the investment. But just a couple of points from me. The first of which is that in aviation and connectivity, things like undersea cables across the Pacific, things that facilitate connectivity, just tend to be expensive. They just are. Though if you think that's expensive, try letting your economy be unconnected, and then you'll find what really expensive is. But they are. Cathay has about 90 aircraft on order. The list price for those, we don't pay list price, but we get some discount. But the list price is about $180 billion for those aircraft. And we've probably not done yet in terms of adding to our order book. So, we're making big investments here as well. And I'm not trying to somehow equate the two. The only point I'm trying to make is that aviation is an expensive game. And I can assure you these are real costs. My friend Peter Locke wrote a note to the South China Morning Post saying somehow if I finance them by selling and leasing back or something, then it wasn't really an investment. If that's true, I would encourage Stanley to finance the airport because it won't be an investment, and we can do it easily. The point here is no matter how you finance it, it's still an investment, and aviation is an investment. The other pertinent facts I think on this case are, look, the current airport does return on its investment. It earns greater than a 5% return on the investment. So again, why would we see that it does that now, but we wouldn't see it possible in the future? And I think, of course, and this one may come up, of course, as the airport expands, as we expand, we will have more flights, which means we'll pay more in landing fees, we will pay more in parking fees, we will pay more in office rental and lounge rental, we will pay more passenger fees. Of course, as a user of the facility, we will pay. That's how it works. An investment is made and recovery is made through charges to those who use it. We fully understand that and expect that to be the case. Ultimately, though, on the airport, I continue to say we're investing behind success. We're not investing in a new, untried and risky thing. We're investing behind something that's already very successful. A couple other interesting points, if I may, on the environment. Now, this is a very important issue. And I would like to say in advance that I am not an accredited environmental scientist. But I think there are a few things here that are important. First of which is, look, I think it's a fact that choosing option 2, which includes the third runway as part of it, will have an environmental impact. It's impossible to imagine reclaiming 650 hectares from the seabed and saying it won't have an impact. So we at Cathay have never said that and wouldn't say that because that would be false. We think it is a fact that there are plenty of ways to talk about the mitigation of what that will require. And actually Stanley Hui himself has written an article on that, talking about setting up dolphin exclusion zones, monitoring the density and behavior of dolphins, etc., etc., etc. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. Cathay fully supports that work because it's important work. It's a fact that Eva Cheng has said, and I take Eva at her word, because you do not do so at your peril, I think, because she's very strong when she has things clear in her mind, that severe mitigation measures may be necessary, and that's important. So when one looks at this, to the extent there are environmental impacts, there will need to be mitigations. We understand that, and we accept that. An interesting fact where I think we have more knowledge about these things than others concerns noise, aircraft noise specifically. And I think the noise story actually is quite an interesting one. And the reason why is this: by selecting option 2 and building a third runway, which is actually further away from Tung Chung, further out into the harbor, you're actually going to reduce the noise that impacts on Tung Chung. You're actually going to change the flight path for arrivals and departures, which takes it further away from built-up areas like Mile 1. And so the building of the third runway actually helps contribute to reducing noise, I think, in the populated areas. Another fact about the noise stuff that's been put out so far is that I think it's quite conservative. And I would point out here that in doing the kind of noise build-ups they've done, the airport authority naturally has to use information they have about current aircraft and the noise profiles that they generate. The point here is, when you come to a third runway in the mid-2020s, you will be at least 2 generations further ahead of aircraft. And generally, each new generation aircraft is about 25% quieter than the previous generation. So the figures that are used now are for the current generation of 777s, A380s, A330s. The next generation is going to be the 787s and A350s that will be coming out towards the back end of this decade. By mid-2025, you're going to have another generation. So I think by then you're going to be somewhere in the 40 to 50% quieter range in terms of aircraft noise. And combine that too with the aircraft, with the runway being further away from the built-up areas, and combine that with the fact that after 2020 we're expecting there to be GPS-based navigation, which is going to allow tighter approaches into the airport. And I think what we're going to find at the end of the day, as a fact, is that the noise situation, as far as the airport, is actually going to be better, significantly better than now. As the airport authorities pointed out, just based on what they know now, with a 3-runway operation, the noise generated shouldn't be any worse than the forecast for the 2-runway operation. That's already a pretty good result. And I think going forward, because of new technology, we're going to do better than that. Now on emissions, and here again, I'm not completely an environmental scientist. I would just like to make a couple of points. The first of which is aviation takes its contribution to carbon emissions very seriously. It is a fact that aviation is the only industrial sector in the world that has established for itself targets for carbon reduction. No other sector worldwide has set targets for carbon reduction. The targets that we had set for aviation, working through IATA and ICAO, which are the UN-sanctioned aviation bodies, are that emissions should be capped from 2020, okay, so carbon neutral growth from then on, and they should be halved by 2050. How is that possible? It's possible for a couple of reasons. First of which is technology. Again, each generation of engines and airframes gets more and more efficient, and not only by 2%, but normally by 10 or 15%. A. B. Looking forward, there is a huge development coming in terms of sustainable biofuels, right, which will be carbon offset against the carbon that we would generate by burning them. Right? And this is an exciting developmental area which I take great interest in. Amazingly, 10 years ago, none of this existed. And now we are on the verge of having sustainable biofuel crops that will not compete with food crops. And this is very important. We saw the disaster of ethanol a while back where everybody went into ethanol, pushed corn prices up, and caused great poverty in the world. So we are talking about crops like jatropha and algae and things which do not compete with food-based crops, but which will generate biofuel in the future that we can burn and will make us net carbon neutral. Again, there is no other industry in the world that has those kind of ambitious targets and is doing that kind of development on eliminating their carbon footprint. And by the way, aviation currently is only about 2% of emissions, which doesn't sound like much, and it isn't, but we take it seriously and we want to do what we can to reduce it. So I know there are issues on emissions. They are broad and encompassing of many things. Certainly, speaking from the aviation point of view, we are trying to do our best to deal with them. Let me close my comments now because I'd like to leave some time for questions. I think it's been a good debate thus far. I think most of the positions put forward have been interesting, they have been well-reasoned, and they have been based on pretty good facts. Although not always, in some cases I've pointed out. To me, the biggest fact is that the Hong Kong model works. And although it's never an easy decision to invest hard-earned money in expanding your infrastructure, I think it's not a hard decision to make either when you think about how the economy works together and how the international connectivity between our pillar industries and how aviation supports that have made Hong Kong the success that it is. I will shortly celebrate my 31st anniversary of coming to Hong Kong. And during those 31 years, the thing that's impressed me so much is that in Hong Kong, we have always made it happen. We have made progress happen. This is a huge strength of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong people, and the Hong Kong economy. I think it's the effort of Hong Kong people that made this barren rock the huge success that it is today. Obviously, Cathay Pacific is keen to play its role in the future development of Hong Kong. We have invested our own capital, we've invested our passion, our experience, and our determination as well. because we think it's really important. It is my hope that after a good debate and a good consultation period, the Hong Kong community will really come together over this important issue. This is not just an issue about should we make this investment or not. I really think this is an issue about what is the future direction of Hong Kong and how are we going to build a sustainable Hong Kong economy going forwards. And I hope that all the Hong Kong community will work together to find a way forward to keep Hong Kong in the position it is now, which is on top as one of the world's leading hubs, both in business terms and aviation terms, and to continue to make us the envy of those around us. So let me close and finish with a quote by, again, David Akers-Jones from his article, which I thought, again, finished it off very nicely when he said, "The vision of those who created Chek Lap Kok as one of the world's key aviation hubs has provided us with a unique opportunity to greatly reinforce our economic future. Let us likewise have the vision to make that a reality." I think those are very good sentiments, which obviously I agree with. And on that note, I will close and take questions. Thank you.
Pass around the microphone. Please raise your hand and give your name and your organisation, please. Corner.
Obviously, Cathay Pacific has an interest in the airport expansion, being the anchor carrier here. I'm wondering,
Sorry, could
are
you
you?
just tell us who you are?
Oh, sorry, Andrew Work, Canadian Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Andrew.
Are you working with other airlines that are flying in here? And are you coordinating your efforts in terms of a response to the airport expansion? And if so, how is that unfolding?
Not indirectly, perhaps. I think there is an organisation called the Board of Airline Representatives, the BAR, which tends to talk about infrastructural issues and all that between all the carriers, and that body has been talking about trying to make its points in terms of its views on the future of aviation in Hong Kong, but basically no more than that.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else here? Just down here.
Martin Sapp, I'm an associate member. I agree with a lot of your arguments, but when you say the airport's a success of a 5% return, which has only been gradually built up to, I take it that Cathay would certainly not accept 5% as an acceptable return, maybe 15%. So aren't you really biased in your approach of essentially saying taxpayers should invest at 5% so Cathay can expand its business and then say 15%?
It would be worth, good point, but it would be worth pointing out that return is just a pure financial return. That takes into account no benefit from the support of the infrastructure for the Hong Kong economy. And I think for me it's impossible to imagine that the Hong Kong economy could be what it is today without the development of the airport, the roadways, the train and the infrastructure that supports it. You know, if we were still at Kai Tak and completely maxed out, I just can't see that we would have achieved the things we've done in the economy overall, and the return doesn't include anything for that. It's just a pure financial return. But my point was to say this was not a boondoggle of a big losing project, and you have to therefore justify it on all sorts of societal benefits. It returns a positive rate of return just as a pure financial investment of itself, which is better than a lot of infrastructure programs. And on top of that, you get all the benefits for the support of the Hong Kong economy. So I think you can make a convincing argument that that's not bad. On your point about aviation, I would say some sage pointed out that the best thing for aviation over time would have been if somebody would have shot down Wilbur Wright on his first flight and stopped the whole thing from happening. Last year, on the biggest year ever in terms of profitability for aviation, the industry returned about 4% as a margin on sales. The forecast for this year is about 0.7% on sales. And any of you who are in a highly capital-intensive business would know it's pretty hard to make that all work with those types of margin numbers. But we do, somehow.
Okay. Anybody else? At the back.
Mark Michelson from IMA. Thanks very much for that. You mentioned one area that actually, I was at the AA presentation yesterday that also came up, and that's about not congestion in the on the ground but in the air. And you mentioned what the Chinese have done, and I'll take your word for it that the 10 miles is okay, 20 miles was too much. You know, some of us, we're not experts, worry about narrowing it. But saying that, you know, a lot of the problem has been the Chinese government because of various other priorities they have, and especially the military, in those corridors. And you know more about this than me, but part of it's weather. If there are weather problems, even if you're narrowing the corridors, that doesn't solve that. Are you working, not only CAFE, but are you confident with the Chinese government? Are you working with the Chinese government, and will they help support this growth as well? Because, you know, above the grounds sometimes as important as on the ground.
Yes, indeed. That's a good question. Well, look, I think the air traffic control people in China, have got the message. Not specifically a Hong Kong message, but I think everywhere in China the growth in aviation has been, fabulous. I mean, much stronger domestically in China than even here. And they've been hard pressed to increase capacity for domestic aviation in China. And by and large, just about kept up with the growth. And that was quite a hard thing to do. But this is one where you don't have full transparency, and it's not a case where they're going to write down and guarantee you that in 2030 they'll have X. But through the interface with IATA, who works with them in China, and through the interfaces with the major Chinese airlines, I think there's a clear indication that positive work is ongoing. I know the CAD here works very closely with their mainland counterparts to make sure there are plans to have the air traffic control capacity that will be needed, and everything that I hear from them says progress is inexorably in the right direction.
Okay, anybody else? Over there? Can you speak up in it?
From the Financial Times.
Oops.
Okay, sorry, let me change to a different mic. You outlined very clearly the risks that our city faces if we don't go ahead with this expansion plan in terms of our status as a hub and so on. But what are the risks that face Cathay Pacific itself if this doesn't go ahead? What would be your plan B? Would you be relying more on, say, Shenzhen?
To tell you the truth, we haven't, we don't have a 2030 plan in Cathay yet. I mean, we try to have a 2013 plan in Cathay. In a business that changes itself so quickly, trying to even think a few years out is very difficult. But responding seriously to your question, if there's a certain point where Hong Kong is going to be maxed out in capacity, we would have to adapt our strategy to deal with that. And as you've seen, and that could go in all sorts of different directions. Obviously, John Leahy from Airbus would be on the very next flight over to sell me as many A380s as he could possibly, deliver to me in fairly short order. But at the same time, and I think what you've seen in London is an interesting case in point where BA, British Airways, is now in a situation where they can't expand their business in London, and what they've done is to start investing outside. And Willie Walsh was quoted recently as saying, well, if we can't invest here, we'll invest in growth elsewhere. And I'm not saying that we would like to do that. We are, Hong Kong is our home. We're committed to Hong Kong. We've helped, I think, to build, Hong Kong Airport, along with the Airport Authority, into the success it's been. And most of our commitment is here. But if it's impossible to grow here 20 years hence, I don't know, we'd have to have a look at other things. But honestly, it's not anything that's on our radar at the moment.
Okay, we'll have two more questions.
My name is Mark Sheldon. I'm with the Chinese University of Hong Kong.
Hi, Mark.
You outlined very well for us the sort of grow or die scenario. And I think many folks here in Hong Kong, particularly in the local community, feel it's grow and die. That the growth has been so fast that now we have such terrible air quality that this is an incredible challenge for the local community. So my question to you is, in terms of this as your base and this as the jurisdiction where these political and investment decisions have to be made, what is your sense of how serious that environmental quality issue is here in Hong Kong? And then, given this political jurisdiction that seems to have very little political legitimacy here, how do you sort of see your way through this politically?
That is a really complicated question, I think, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to give you a great answer. But the way I see it, I mean, I think we would reject the premise that things are only at a breaking point, and therefore you need to somehow shut off from the rest of the world, or stop somehow participating in the growth of the world. I mean, I think for us, we need to somehow do both. I mean, I think it's important, very important, that environmental considerations be a key part of this decision. As I outlined in my speech, I think there are some major issues that need attention as part of that, and I think they will come out as part of the consultation, and they'll certainly come out as part of the environmental impact statement that would need to be done if there's a basic decision to proceed to that stage of the investigation. But at the same time, I don't think it's an either or. I think we have to figure out how to do both and I think Hong Kong, in my experience, has always been great at figuring out how to do both and. So I think the either or choice is a false one, because I don't think it leads to a successful result at the end of the day, would be my answer.
Okay, now final question, please. Reporter over there.
Hello, Mr. SLOSAR. I'm just a reporter of Now TV. I just want to ask, as the price of the oil decrease, it seems that it will help to decrease the cost, but will it help to push the valuations of Cathay Pacific shares? And do you think that the fuel hedging will affect the profit of Cathay Pacific? Thank you.
Not specifically on topic here, I guess. I'd just say, look, maybe just a general comment is that, fuel is the largest single cost we have in aviation these days. High fuel prices are bad, I think, just in totality. They're certainly bad for me as a cost issue. I think they're bad for the world economy. I think it leads to consumers having to pay more to put the petrol in their car or to heat their home, which means they're not going to spend on other things, not just travel, but on any sorts of things that aren't bare necessities. I think when the world economy is maybe a little bit weaker than anyone would like it to see, high oil prices are put the world economy in a certain amount of peril. And so, for Cathay, we think it's a great thing if oil's a little bit lower than it is now, and we think it will most importantly support the world economy, because when you come down to it, aviation is always strongly correlated with the world economic activity and world trade. Anything that makes world economic activity better and enhances trade is going to be generally good for everybody, and certainly going to be good for aviation, and anything that does the opposite would be bad.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean. I think we all agree that was most interesting. Thank you. Now I'm afraid he gets the FCC present.
Okay.